If you can't change your thinking, no matter what happens to you, no matter what life dishes up, because your mindset has already been framed, because that paradigm is there, that's how you're going to see things. And I'm hoping that what you're going to be able to share today, not for you, for your friends and your family, you can share this with them, that they can change their thinking, because all your thinking is positive. We all like that positive farmer. None of us are negative. Show of hands, yeah? Yeah? But it's for the neighbor, it's for the friend. I don't see that. Don't nudge anybody, please. But that's the reality. That the way we perceive a situation is more closely connected to the reaction than the situation itself. So how you perceive it is so important. So, immediately what do you do? Like for example, something that's close and very relevant. We can look at the lockdown. When you say lockdown, how do you respond? What's the first thoughts that come to your mind? Having been through it, and then not even now, with Sydney, and what's happened there? What do you do? Melissa, wanting your husband to come back from Sydney? Yeah, because you don't want him to get stuck there. Yeah. But that's the thing. What do we do? And the moment it comes, we've got to deal with it. We've got to check it. It's like when you're going traveling. I know not many of us, we couldn't travel a lot with all of the lockdowns and everything. But when you're getting onto an airplane, you go through the baggage check and you go through the metal detectors and everything. My kids gave me a new name, because when we travel a lot, they started calling him Mr. Check, Mr. Random Check, because I'm always getting a random check. So I get called aside. So sometimes I don't even stand in the line. I just stand out the one side. And the security guard says, "What you doing?" I'm like, "Hey mate, I'm ready. Come on, you can do what you want to do." And the thing is, you know what happens. You try and carry anything that's on the no-fly list. And you got big posters there. You can't take this, no sharp objects, no aerosols, and this is a bit painful to me. Not even cologne that's over 100 milliliters that you can take, because I was flying in South Africa, true story. Maybe this is therapy time for me. And I bought this new Dolce & Gabbana cologne. And because of who I am, the bigger you buy, the better value. So I wasn't going to buy 100 ml, because the 100 ml was, let's say $50. But the 200 ml was $75. Now come on, I'm going to go for that. I'm going to go for the 200 ml, $75, you know what I mean? And not realizing, I was flying from Johannesburg to Namibia. Now Namibia is a neighboring country to South Africa, but it was like another state. I mean, James, when you were back there, it was part of the Curry Cup. It was one of the provinces that you play against. And it never struck my mind that I was flying international. So I didn't take my 200 ml cologne and put it in my check-in luggage. I took it in my carry-on luggage. And I'm going through, and then obviously my bag goes through that scanner and everything, and I'm like, "Come on mate, I'm ready to go." And then I'm like, the guy's like, what happened there, And he calls me, sir, he goes, "Can you open your bag?" I'm like, "Yeah, open my bag, blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "What's that?" I'm like, "Oh, it's my cologne." And he goes, "Can you just check the milliliters on it?" I'm like, 200 milliliters. And then he looks at the chart and he goes, "Can you read that?" And you know what it is, nothing more than 100 mils. And so you had to get discounted. So where am I going with this? Similarly, with the flights that are ready to take us to our destinations, if we look at it as our battery running low here, is that my signal? Similarly, with regards to where we're going and where we're tracking in life, what are we carrying with us? Because our thoughts are like those no-fly zone items, that if we don't check them and remove them, they're gonna destroy the opportunities ahead. Because we're not going to be able to see that. Because we're not going to be able to get on board with what's there. So most often than not, we're going to find that, we need that checkpoint to remove that thoughts, those thoughts that are going to weigh us down. So this is why I say that, perception is so important. Because with our mind and everything that's there, it's so important that we're able to check them. Now there's a true story. I don't know if you heard about this true story, but there was a man that was accidentally locked in a railway cart, a refrigerator cart, and he couldn't get out, banged, shouted, but he was the only one there, and realized that if I can't get out, I'm going to freeze to death in here. That's what he thought, because it was a refrigerated cart, no one was around, and that's what he thought. So he wanted to let his family know what had happened. He found a knife, and on the wooden floor, he began to etch some sort of goodbye note. And it's so cold, he says, my body is getting numb. If I could just go to sleep, these may be my last words. Not a good situation. So it's one of those doors that once they shut, you couldn't open it from the inside. The next day, sadly, he was found deceased. An autopsy revealed every physical sign that his body, that he was frozen, that he had frozen to death, hypothermia and all of that. But here's the catch part of it. The problem was that when they arrived the next day to retrieve his body and to find him there, the refrigerated cart was not plugged in. And that's a true story. People like to look, skeptics say, Myan, you're making it up, your motivation speakers, what you all are like, that's what, not me, other guys. and that was it. So that is what happened. Because he thought that he was going to freeze to death. Guess what his mind did? His mind began to play out the scenario that he was suffering from hypothermia, that he was going to freeze, that he was going to go into the state of, not coming back. And eventually, that's what happened. Now, some of us look at that and go, a bit far-fetched. Well, he had killed himself by his thoughts. Now, maybe not as extreme as a case like that. But, again, no show of hands, but just a quick checkup from the neck up. How are we going with these things? How are we going with our thoughts? Somebody doesn't greet you, they miss you, or whatever. What's the immediate thought that you get? Same way we think of something that seems negative. How do we determine that? How do we process that? Because remember, the problem is not the problem. The problem is how you react to it, how you respond to it. That's the key thing. And in a case like this, it's quite extreme, but that's a reality. So if you don't want to believe that story, here's another true story. 1991, Gulf War. Saddam Hussein and his Scud missiles were being launched against Israel. And they found that many Israelis died as a result of Iraq's missiles. Not of the missiles landing and blowing up and killing them. They died because the vast majority of them were not hit by the missiles. They died rather from heart failure, get this, brought on by fear, anxiety, stress associated with these acts. I even documented it in a book that I wrote called You Can, where it shows you that they died similar to the guy in the rail car, the refrigerator's car, because of their perception of the situation. When those missiles were fired, and Israeli news or radio or whatever put it out, hey, the missiles have been shot over from wherever, they straight away went into panic mode. It caused an emotional stress, and it was the psychological impact of the Scud missile, rather than the missile or the physical impact, that claimed the majority of the victims. And that was it. Just the thought, whoa, there's a missile on its way, caused them to get into the state of panic, anxiety, and then exacerbated and resulted in their deaths. So how do we process it? And that is something, people may call it a skill, but I believe it's part of our toolkit for life. We need to know how to process that. We need to know how to deal with that. And the two guys that I had the last time, unfortunately they couldn't make it tonight. But Jimmy, he's the manager of the local gym here, and he was supposed to share a little bit on some of the practical things that we can do to be able to release our own, feel good, endorphins, serotonin, and all the things that relax us, calm us naturally. Our natural antidepressants as such. And I'm not talking about trying to go run a marathon, just little stuff, going out for a walk, taking the time to do some sort of physical activity, whether it's in the garden or whatever, but just to keep yourself occupied. Because your mind, becomes overwhelmed. You become overrun with all of this. Now, if you're someone that watches television, and you listen to the news and all of that consistently, let me just give you some insight. Newspapers, television news, they want to sell. And guess what news sells? Good news? Bad news. So the way that the news is geared, the majority of the report is going to be what? Bad, negative. So if you're going to be all the time getting your daily fill or whatever from watching news, listening to news, I'm not saying be an ostrich with its head in the sand and think that everything is hunky-dory. No, I'm saying understand that you need to have a limit, not to be overwhelmed in being able to fill yourself with everything that is negative. So that's something that you're going to have to process, because if you don't, it's going to be again, what you take in, what you see is going to be crucial as to how you unpack what is out there. And with our mind, this summarizes the last two slides in terms of the guy getting stuck in the railway car, in terms of what happened with the Israelis. And this is something that I've taken out from a scientific journal that tells you that our mind is so powerful that under certain conditions it can consciously ask the body to change, and guess what? The body will comply. Just a silly illustration. You look back at photo albums. I'm giving away my age as well. Photo albums, youngsters, explain to what a photo album was or is. You look at an old photo album, old wedding album, or whatever, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and you look at something in the past, and just by looking at the photograph, what happens now? What happens with your cheek? Now, for us, it's something that you really can't see, but for the European faces, when you are flushed, you get all red and all of that, so you can't hide that there. And you'll see that, when you look at a photograph or you look at a memory from the past, and you look at it and you're like, wow, and then you feel all. And how did that come about? It came about because you looked at something that your mind processed, and your thoughts began to affect you physically. And it resulted in either feeling good, and I'm using a positive instance because sometimes you look at something in the past, then you get angry about it. But in a positive sense, that's what happens. Just by looking at something, just by taking it on board, you can lead to this. And this is what the message is in this, that as you think, so you become. Your thoughts are so powerful that just by thinking on something, even it's proven now, maybe for the next talk we can look at that in terms of social media, it shows you that because we carry our phones so often in our pockets, that even when our phones are not in the pocket, we feel it ringing, or we feel it vibrating, that there's a text coming in or a call. What happens? Our mind has been so influenced by the technology that sometimes it plays a little trick on us. So as you think, so you become. That is, you become what you believe. So what are we looking at? That's something that, again, I want to emphasize in terms of what do we believe. I shared this the last time. People asked me, why did you come to Armidale? Then you could wait every. Why did you get the question often when you're in Utah? Why did you come to Armidale? And I'm like, well, why not? Why not? Because the truth of the matter is that, it doesn't matter where you are. What matters is what's going on inside. That's the key thing. It doesn't matter where you are. one of my favorite bands, Crowded House. You guys stole that. They're a New Zealand band. I was going to tell you. Pam, you agree? Crowded House is a Kiwi band. Yes, Pam is from New Zealand. Have a good story. So Crowded House, one of their songs is, everywhere you go, you always take the weather. Everywhere you go. The other favorite one is, hey now, hey now. Okay, I'll sing. What does it mean? And you know, my kids would listen to the song, catchy tune, and they like it. They go, Dad, what does it mean? Everywhere you go, you always take the weather. And I said, well, the reality is that, again, we talk about bad weather. We talk about creating an atmosphere, creating an environment. Even before a speaker comes, you know, we notice that I didn't have this long introduction and play videos. In some cases, you need that to get people to know that. But we don't need that. And that's, again, something that we look at. Everywhere you go, you take the weather. You make the weather. You make the climate. You make the environment. Not climate, but the environment, the place where you're going. You don't need to go somewhere in order to feel good. Because you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, because that's a different interpretation of the song, but that's what I got at. And Google can't be wrong, so Google is always right. But that's pretty much it. Everywhere you go, you take the weather. To understand that you become what you believe. You know, in New Zealand, one of the tasks that I had was to work with what we call beneficiaries. So people that are unemployed, but not just unemployed, but they've got a long history. It's sort of a generational thing, that they've been on the benefit, the dole, generational, you know, and these are things that they will tell you. So it's not just me trying to, and I'm not trying to put people down, but that's the reality. And my role at the time was contracted to the government to teach them the skill, to get them off the benefit and into employment. And they would come there, and you know, when you start a course, as the lecturer, as the person leading, you want to break the ice, and then you, oh, here we go, battery's dead. George, can you get the power supply, please? The battery? Or is it the signal? And you know what happens is that you get to a stage where, so you ask people, why are you here? You know, tell us why you're on the course. And I realized straight away I made a mistake, because some of the responses were like, I'm here because I have to be here, because the government said if I don't come here, they're going to cut my benefit. And then, that's not the response you want. But as you process that, and as you go through that, you realize that they are there, and they will tell you, why do you want to be on there? Oh, because my mother was on it, my grandfather was on it, my grandmother was on it, and so I'm on that benefit. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against the benefit to help people. If you're disabled, if you're sick, you can't work, and if you're in between jobs, hey, fantastic. But if you're making a career out of it, and for me as a life coach, I feel sorry, because there's so much potential that you have that you can, you'll be missing out. And the question that I would ask the one mom was, you said you want the benefit, your mother's been on it, your grandmother's been on it, and I said, you mentioned you got a daughter. What do you want for your daughter? Do you want your daughter to be on the benefit as well? And he made me think. And I said, well, you got an opportunity today to start to work to change that. And I'm talking about leaving a legacy. Your grandmother left that for your mother left that for you. But what are you leaving your daughter? And that's the difference. It's about the mindset, and getting the mindset to focus on the positive, and to get to focus on what is ahead. So on that note, I'm going to give you a quick 5-minute comfort break, and then we're going to come back. Just a quick stretch, because I've got the gift of continuity, but I'm going to bring it to a close. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. Is it okay? All right, 5 minutes? Sweet.